Ellen Stofan, welcome to the Proven Not Perfect Village.
I am so happy to be here this morning with you, Chandra.
Oh my God, it is an absolute honor. Ellen, you are such an accomplished woman in science and in leadership, and I'm just so excited that we have the privilege to unpack that. So I just have to start by setting the stage early, how appreciative I am to have the conversation with the Undersecretary of Science and Research, who, quite frankly, has also served massively for our country as director of National Air and Space Museum and NASA chief scientist. I mean, the things that you've done in this lifetime, just one thing is to be dreamed of, but to have your imprint in such a wonderful space for the continuation of big innovation for the world is pretty impressive. And I know I've learned through you, as you and I happen to be in the room where it happens with a group of senior women leaders and having a wonderful behind the curtain conversation. I just kind of felt like a kid at one point because you just kept unpacking more and more phenomenal things that happen at the Smithsonian that I had not been aware of. I'll just name a couple of the things here just to set the stage. Not only is it a museum, which is full stop where I stopped, not too proud to admit that, but it's also focused on some core pillars in education and research. And it's a complex of 21 museums, not one museum, it's 21 museums. It also includes the National Zoo. It includes research facilities, not just in the US, but around the world. It focuses on global science, culture. The archival is incredible and amazing. Conservation is a major foundation, and there's just a large educational reach. My gosh, that's amazing. Ellen, thank you for joining the Proven Not Perfect podcast. I just want to fangirl for just a minute to tell you that.
Well, I've had a couple amazing jobs, but it's really such an honor to work at a place like the Smithsonian that really holds this kind of quintessential American story, the good parts, the bad parts, the
Yeah.
inspiring parts.
It does. That's so true. So can we start with kind of the human side of things and before the titles, before the institutions, who was Ellen Stofan as a young scientist and what first made you curious about the universe?
I always think I was sort of born curious. I was one of those kids. I grew up in northern Ohio. My dad worked for NASA, so of course you might see a connection there, but I just grew up curious. I always wanted to know why. I picked up rocks, I picked up shells, sticks, any natural thing in the world. I was always fascinated with it. And my parents were great. They really supported me. They never questioned like, why does she do all these things? Why is she interested? And when I was in kind of junior high, my mom was an educator and she was getting a master's degree and she took a geology course. And she told the professor, my daughter loves rocks. Can I bring her
Mm.
along on our field trip? And the professor said yes. And I think I followed him like a puppy that day because this idea that you could look at layers of rock in the earth and that each of those layers told a story about what the earth was like 85 million years ago or 100 million. I just found it fascinating that
Wow.
geologists read the earth like a book. And so I decided at age like 11 or 12, I was going to be a geologist. And that's what I did.
Wow. So as your career expanded from research to executive leaderships, what parts of you had to evolve? Because there's a purity around I love rocks that, even as I think about my own journey in leadership, right? There's this purity of curiosity that you bring for the thing. And then we grow up and we reconcile how to keep that love and that passion and that integrity sort of wrapped in the other things.
I think that's a great question because I always feel like I sort of fell into leadership.
Hmm.
Because what was important to me was the science. Are we answering the most important scientific questions? For me, focusing on planetary geology. So I study volcanoes on Venus, Mars, Earth, and one of the moons of Saturn. Obscure profession. But
Casual.
getting involved at NASA, you're sitting in meetings and people are talking, and I realized I was really interested in strategy. Like, how do we go, put together missions to go to the most important places to answer the most important questions?
Mm,
And I always felt I'm a taxpayer like everybody else, and I want to make sure we're maximizing every dollar to get the most science because, somewhat selfishly, I want to answer these big scientific questions. How does the earth work? How can we study other planets to learn how the earth works?
wow.
Was there life beyond earth? Where do we need to go to answer that question? What do we need to measure? So the more I got involved, I would start saying, "Oh, this path is a better path than that path."
Yeah.
Or I hear two people arguing, and you know what? There's actually a compromise that's a win-win for everyone.
Mm,
So I just started speaking up
yeah.
and saying, no, this is actually a better path, and here's why. And all of a sudden, someone said, well, why don't you lead this? Why don't you lead this? Why don't you lead this? And I was always like, what? Well, okay. And I always joke that it was bossiness because it was just like I took that passion for geology and science and turned it into how do I help us get to the answers to the big questions? And that's always what's driven me through leadership. It was
Mm.
how do we go do the right thing? How do we make sure we're doing it the right way?
I think of that as calling, Ellen, right? I think you get to a certain point in your career where that curiosity goes from the fix it myself, the do it myself, to really unpacking those bigger questions that go so far beyond the initial assignment. And I love that you speak of that, right? Because for many of us that are called to lead, it was never a mission to do so. It was more a calling to do so once you found yourself in this place where your questions happen to become bigger than those around you. And the responsibility to hold that space too is pretty neat. That's very cool.
Yeah, and one of the other things was when I started out, I was always a team member. I was on a NASA mission team, or I was part of an office team where we were trying to manage the scientists on a mission. And I feel like through that process,
Mm,
especially some of the early missions that I was on, I watched really good leaders. And one of the characteristics I always felt that a really good leader had was that they appreciated their team. They
yeah,
knew people on the team were going to have ideas that they didn't have. They knew they needed all those different skills. And NASA's really an example of that. You have a team with like scientists and all different kinds of engineers, and everybody needs to work together because one person doesn't have the answers. Only
yeah.
the team has the answers. So I also really kind of grew up through this system where to be a good leader, it meant you had to know how to be a good team member, but man, you had to work as a team because otherwise you're not getting anything done if it's just, oh, it's me, me, me. It's not me, it's the team.
It's the team. That's right on. And I would imagine in particular at NASA, the crucial critical considerations at any given moment of a decision of a team member is so impactful that you really have to understand team at just a superhuman level. Would that be a proper assumption?
Yeah, it really is. And I remember one of the first teams I was on that it was a spacecraft that had just gotten to Venus, and we were just doing the initial test phase of the spacecraft. Is everything working? Is everything working? And I looked at it and said, "You know what? If while we're doing this one test,
Mhm.
we take a little bit of data right here, it'll give us our first image. It's a really high priority area we're not coming back to for a whole year. It would be a really cool piece of data, and we could make it so that it was part of the test. It wasn't we're not going out of our way, we're not ignoring the test phase before we go into the science phase with which the engineers get hyper about.
Yep.
And I I was a postdoc on the mission. I was not a team member, I was a postdoc. So I
Mm,
told my boss my idea. He's like, "I think it's good. Let's you and I take it to the head." We took it to the head. The crazy thing is he listened because,
mm,
again, he was the type of leader who said, "This woman's a postdoc. She's only been here for 6 months. She doesn't know
mm.
anything. Get out of my office." Instead, he was like, "That sounds like the kernel of a good idea.
Wow.
Let's run the idea to ground and see if it's doable without putting anything in danger." And they executed it, and they got that image, and I still have the image. It's at work, not here at home. I
Wow.
still have that image because I was so proud of it because it showed me the power of make don't be afraid of big ideas.
Mhm,
Know how to make your case.
mm.
Because you have to be able to make your case. You have to make it a win-win for everybody. You can't just go in and say, "Oh, here's my great idea. The rest of you lose, I win." Right?
That's
It's
right.
gotta it's gotta be an idea that moves the team forward. And so that small incident actually taught me a lot.
That's so big because we spend a lot of time talking about ideas, um, and how ideas beget real innovation. But what you bring forward in that story also is the leadership responsibility to make space for those ideas to come. And I think that that begets the confidence of the team to continue to generate those ideas because we've all had those leaders before that maybe stunt us, right? They either aren't interested in the extra viewpoint or even worse, right? And so I think what you're hitting on there, in particular for those that might be a bit earlier in their career, if you find yourself in a place, right, where you are not encouraged, much less allowed to take the Rubik's Cube that you're presented and just turn it a little bit and start to ask questions and form opinions and speak up, then I would say really consider if that's the right place for you.
Yeah. I totally agree. At NASA at one point, the head of NASA was NASA Administrator Charlie Bolden, who's one of my just absolute personal heroes, amazing individual, flew on the space shuttle 4 times, was a fighter pilot, just an amazing individual. But Charlie felt like NASA was getting too risk averse.
Mm.
So he created an award called Fail Smart.
I love that.
Because he wanted people to fail, and he wanted to give an award to who had failed in kind of a way that moved the agency forward, not just
Mm.
failed and like, "Oh my god," but how did you fail and move the agency forward? So I went to some of these award ceremonies, and I expected to be really impressed by the individuals who had come up with these ideas. But what I was even more impressed was every single one of them, they worked at different NASA centers across the country. Every single one of them brought up their supervisor. My
Wow.
supervisor had my back. My
Mm.
supervisor encouraged me to be innovative. My supervisor let me run. And
Mm.
I thought that was just so interesting because, again, I expected it to be about, oh, this person's amazing or they're super innovative or they have some quirky thing, but they were in an environment that let them thrive. And I thought that
Mm.
was really cool.
No, that's right on. So this is proven not perfect. And a lot of times, the women leaders that are in my village that share, we all have a point in our journey where we acknowledge the imperfect parts of it. That can be a personal discovery, that can be an external force, it could be anything. Um, would you share with us an imperfect part, something that maybe you grew past in your journey to such accomplished leadership?
So many, because I would definitely say the not perfect is, I'm one of these people who's got permanent imposter syndrome and everything else. But, early in my career, especially, I would get invited into rooms where I was the only person who looked like me. I mean, all white men and me.
Yeah,
Um,
I know
and
nothing about that.
yeah, I know you know nothing about that, nothing about that. So, you're in this room And I remember one room, this guy was, he was this really aggressive engineer, older, pretty senior, and there were probably 25 people in the room. Again, I was the only woman, and he would use the F word.
Mm,
And he would look at me and he'd go, "Sorry, Ellen." And then he'd go on, and he did it like 6 times through that meeting. And I was so humiliated.
hmm,
He was, every time he's trying to point out, "She doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong. She
mm,
doesn't belong here." And, this instance of just being like, I didn't, and I've told this story before, and people are always like, "What did you do?" I did nothing. I
mm,
sat there, I stewed, I got angry, I slunk out of the room.
hmm.
Um, and, that to me was the not
Perfect.
I learned, right? Because I wish so many times I could go back into that room and shut that guy down.
Mm,
But I was too young, too intimidated, too feeling like, what do I do with this position where I'm different? He's making me feel even more different.
yeah.
Do I belong here? And I was internalizing his contempt and
Mm.
his trying to make me other, and I think
And that's
that's
when it gets you, Ellen, right? When you start to internalize what, quite frankly, is the intention,
yeah.
right? That's when you start to lose yourself and lose your grounding. Oh, I love that you said that.
Yeah. So, now older me
Yeah,
would come right back in that guy's face, right? But
that's
I'm not
right.
a 37-year-old anymore, right? I'm in my
Yes.
60s, I'd be
Yes.
like, I'm not taking any of that dude."
Yes.
But I was not that person, and
Mm,
frankly, a lot of people aren't
a
because that's
lot of
a
people aren't.
really difficult situation, and so those are the times, I've struggled. I've had a major I spent 5 years working on a mission, concept for NASA. There's a big competitive process, and I spent 5 years working on a concept to send a boat to a sea on one of Saturn's moons. There's seas, basically liquid
Wow.
gasoline. I put my heart and soul into this, and we lost. And you really question yourself. Did we lose because of me?
Yeah.
Did we lose because I didn't work hard enough? I didn't try hard enough? Where was the shortcoming? There were complicated reasons that we ended up not winning. But I really question, you
Mm,
question yourself, like, am I
yes.
really in the right place? I leaned out, you feel kinda like Icarus, right? I went too close to the sun, and now I'm getting smacked back down to earth. Um, and and on the other hand, it took me a while to become more calm about it. I'm still not entirely happy about it, but you have to take these things.
You do.
Sometimes you succeed and sometimes you fail.
Mhm.
You do learn from failure. You learn a lot more about from failure than you do. I know that's a cliche, but you
It's
do.
true.
You definitely do.
It's true.
And you also learn that you can pick yourself up and keep going. And it was about 7 months after that happened that I got a call asking me if I wanted to interview to be chief scientist of NASA. So I'm also a big believer in this kind of one door closes, another door opens kind of thing.
I think it's pretty a couple things I just want to unpack there because or at least put a pin in for any of the listeners as I listen to your wisdom there. The first thing is unlearning. So we will be in situations that hindsight, we are not proud of how we showed up or how we performed. And maybe we beat ourselves up with regret sometimes. Um, but it's the unlearning, right? It's okay. I've had that experience. Two things. What am I taking away from it? And how am I going to now let that go? Right? Almost forget it, but not forget it. Right? The other thing is to free ourselves up for the opportunity to see better coming out of what potentially was a failure. I mean, I can't think of a better failing forward story than now you're going to be chief scientist at NASA. But there's something else too that hits my mind as I listen to that story, and that is this. And I've never thought about this because I'm a particularly curious person. The same curiosity that I bring to just about everything that I'm involved in is the same analytical curiosity that I bring to myself in a way that no one outside of my brain would ever understand. Right. And so I listen to you and I have this own sort of observation that there's a blessing and a curse that comes with this ultra curious mind. You're excessively curious, which is pulling you forward. But when things don't go the way that you want them to, you're excessively curious and trying to figure out what went wrong. That analytical loop. And it is I never thought about this until I listened to your story.
It's, um it's hard. It's hard to work your way through that because it is. You go back and you question everything, and I'm not sure it's entirely useful, because
It's not useful
you
at
have
a
to
certain
let
point.
go. It's
Yeah.
like you said, you
Hmm.
gotta say, "All right, I failed. Here are the top 3 or 4 reasons. Here's what I've learned from it, and now we need to put this down and move on."
Yeah.
And I think th that is the hardest part. On the other hand, I think if you haven't failed, if you haven't gone through that,
Yeah.
it's much harder to say, I really understand what it's like to win, because if I don't know what it's like to fail, do I actually appreciate it when I succeed? Because
Mm,
believe me, then when I did become chief scientist of NASA, I really appreciated that.
that's right on.
I understood it was not the path maybe that I had hoped for, but it was an amazing path and it led me amazing places. It's not like I ever stopped regretting, okay, it could have gone, a different way, but it went this way and that's good and let's embrace it and let's go and let's make the most of this.
Wow. All right. So now we got to kind of shift to the Smithsonian because I think
Yeah.
this is such a neat opportunity to share with other people some of the big ahas for me. So most people experience Smithsonian through museum visit, but that is only the front door. What is the Smithsonian really responsible for? Can you just break this down and make it plain?
We have the simplest, most elegant mission statement, I think, in the world. And obviously, organizations get really hung up on their mission statements and they change them. And we received our mission statement in the 1830s from a British gentleman named James Smithson, who was a bit of a scientist. He was a gentleman scientist. He lived in the United Kingdom, or in England, and he had never been to the United States. But he was the illegitimate son of a duke. And there is speculation that he looked at America as a place where you could succeed no matter where you came from,
Hmm.
no matter what class or what your parents were or what they did. So he leaves his fortune when he dies to his nephew. But he says, if my nephew dies without children, which thankfully he did, I want the money to go to the United States to found an institution for the increase and diffusion of knowledge.
Wow.
And that's the mission of the Smithsonian to this day, the increase and diffusion of knowledge.
Wow.
And that's so simple, right?
That's
So
very.
in our case, Congress debates for almost a decade what to do with this gift because they're kind of like, what the heck? This random British guy dies and we get this money and he wants us to do this thing and it's Congress. So they're like, well, so they
So it's
decide
always been the same.
they're always the same. So, but in amazing, amazing wisdom,
Yeah.
they decide to found the Smithsonian Institution as a research institute
Mm.
right in the middle of Washington, D.C., with the government literally wrapped around the idea that knowledge is important,
Hmm.
that increasing knowledge is important, that spreading knowledge is important. And so to me, it's not only a great gift from James Smithson,
Yeah.
but it was a great gift from the United States to say to its people, these are our values.
Mm.
We think this is important. So we started out as a research institute, but at that point, a lot of doing research was going and collecting stuff. So you were out collecting every butterfly and dinosaur skeletons and things about culture, art. So gradually, out of one building, the Smithsonian Castle, we kept building more buildings, and then we'd have enough stuff, and we'd be like, oh, we need a natural history museum. Oh, now we need an art museum. Now we need a National Air and Space Museum because we have so much stuff. And that's continued to this day, where, as you said, we have 21 museums, a national zoo, and 3 research institutes around the world. But what we still do is increase and diffuse
Mm,
knowledge. And in this 250th anniversary of the United States, I like to also think on how the Smithsonian holds America's story.
mm.
It's like we
Oh,
hold that story in trust for the American people.
wow.
And the secretary likes to talk about our real mission is to make sure we preserve history, to understand what's happening in the present, and help the country create a shared future that really moves the United States forward.
Wow.
And so, this idea of our shared future is really what we're thinking about, especially this year.
I just got chills listening to you as we're speaking between Juneteenth celebration and the 4th of July, and just being in this place of legacy and history and paying it forward. Even why, I believe I've been inspired and called to create this platforms of conversations, right? Man, as you think about the increase in diffusion of knowledge, there must be an incredible responsibility that you feel on a daily basis as you walk into your leadership responsibility there.
I've really been thinking about this a lot recently because you have to, and this to some extent is how I regarded my work at NASA also, because I feel like I've been able to, work for these just two absolutely iconic American brands. You're not, it's not your NASA and it's not your Smithsonian. You're a steward. You're a
Ooh.
steward. We're celebrating our 180th anniversary this summer of the Smithsonian. So you're a steward of this brand, of this knowledge, of this American story. And so, how do I, in my time at the Smithsonian, help move the institution forward in the best way I can? How do I make sure we're doing the best, most impactful science? How do I make sure we're saving species? How do I make sure that we're making sure we understand forest and coastal ecosystems to the benefit of the people who live in those places? And so, really thinking about what is our responsibility going forward and how do we engage the American people, but also people who visit us from around the world?
Hmm.
How do we engage everyone in that story to have them contemplate, to have them commemorate, in some cases celebrate, in some cases cry, in some cases, but in all cases, how do we move ourselves forward together,
Hmm.
not divided?
Oh gosh. Woo, well said. So I have to ask you this because as I was doing my research, I'm not sure if this is truly a fact or not a fact, whatever, but I understand that less than 1% of the Smithsonian's collections are on digital display at any one time. Is that right?
That's on physical display. It's under 10%. I'm not sure of the exact number, but I
Yeah.
know it's under 10%. We
Wow.
have 157 million artifacts in our collection. We have the
Oh
largest
my
collection
God.
of any museum complex in the world.
Oh my
I
God.
will say, put that aside, the Natural History Museum
Yeah.
has 148 million of those specimens. So think of going back into the back drawers of the Natural History Museum and opening cabinets that has every beetle in the world,
Oh
every
my God.
mosquito in the world, every bird in the world. So a lot of those collections and a lot of what's not on display are these extensive natural history collections that really document the known world. So if you go to the Air and Space Museum or some of our art museums, there's a much higher percentage of those collections on display. But the
Mhm.
natural history collection is so big. But a lot of those collections actually are loaned on a regular basis, or we have scholars who come in and use those collections to learn more about the state of the world, how species evolve, all kinds of crazy things using our collections.
So then does that make I just think of megatrends and digitization being one of them. does that make that really important for you, to establish, how do you organize and create this access, to all of this extra information? Because somebody in some forest somewhere is figuring something out, and that's the one piece of information that might help them.
Exactly, and we're really finding that right now. So digitization is one of our prime activities right
Mm,
now, and let me give you a couple examples. Right now, we're digitizing all the insect pollinators. So think bees, there are certain
mm,
kind of moths and butterflies, there are some beetles that act, they carry pollen, obviously really critical for agriculture, right?
yeah.
No pollen, no pollinators, no food. So
Yep.
this is really critical. So we're trying to get all of those digitized, and not just that. This is going to sound horrible. After we digitize it, take really high resolution photographs, make sure all the information that's on a card about it is all it's interpreted by AI, and it's all now a digital record. We pull a leg off and get the genomics of that insect
Wow.
pollinator so that we really have this concept of the extended specimen. So it's not just, all right, here's a
Wow.
picture of a bee. It's
It's
where does that bee
perfect.
live? What are the genetics of that bee? What's its behavior? And all that information we're collecting. Now, on a practical level, we actually have scientists from the Department of Agriculture are actually embedded in the Natural History Museum. And last year, at
Oh,
one
wow.
point, they were doing ship inspections in ports in the US, and they found a bee on the ship. They found a little colony of bees, and they said, "We don't know what these bees are." So they literally took one of the bees, they shipped it to the Natural History Museum. They went through their collections. They found out it was an invasive bee that would harm US bees.
Oh,
And
wow.
not only that, it had some mites on it that would have potentially infected US bees.
Wow.
So we got that information back, and they made sure those bees were no more. Um, but while all that was happening, that ship sat in port with its cargo being held.
Mm.
If we had that digitized and it was
Yeah.
ready to go, someone could have held up their phone to that bee. We would have found out what it was. We would have offed it right there and then,
Yeah.
and that cargo would have been released. So these collections
Mm.
not only have scientific benefit, having them digitized, we think would unlock a lot of economic benefit to the United States. So we're really leaning into this hard because it's important on so many levels.
Wow. So the Smithsonian definitely feels like a bridge between the past, the present, and the future. My question is, how do you lead an institution that must preserve history while also helping society imagine what comes next?
It's really interesting, and so many of our curators are so brilliant around this. And, I was the head of the Air and Space Museum when we were renovating the museum. And so thinking of what are the stories that we tell?
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
building needed huge repairs, so we had to take everything out of the building and then clean it up, put it all back in. And so because we had to redo the galleries, and most of them had been there for decades and decades. So this idea of what are the stories we're not telling?
Mm.
And so I came in, and especially having come right from NASA, it was, we're not doing enough to tell the story of how technology is changing everything. So it's not just what happened in the past, the amazing story of Apollo and humans getting to the moon. It's not just the story of the space shuttle, this amazing innovation that let us come back and forth between space. But it's where are we going next? What's the
Yeah.
future in space? Are we gonna have settlements on the moon? Are we having settlements on Mars? Who gets to go to space? That used to only
Yeah.
be government astronauts. Now it's private citizens. So are we telling those stories?
Hmm.
Do we have like a flown booster from Blue Origin, one of our new artifacts in the museum? Because this is telling the story of the present and future of space. So we really think about that when we're putting together an exhibit. It's how do you how do you again frame the present in the context of the past, but always get folks in there to think about what's next.
Hmm.
Because I feel sometimes people can get pessimistic or negative because they don't feel like they have any agency in the future. You know, you feel like the future is just something that's smacking you back and forth in the face,
Yeah.
right? Feel like you don't have any agency. And so I
Especially
I think
nowadays.
yeah, especially nowadays. So I always think part of our role as the Smithsonian is to help people unpack a little bit of what's happening now that seems sometimes overwhelming
Mhm.
and help not we don't want to tell people what to think.
Yeah,
I want to get them to think and
that's right.
say like, look, there are all these paths. You do get to choose.
Hmm.
You know, this is the amazing thing in the US. You know, we get to vote. We get to have a voice. We get to choose. So how do we use that? But I think people have to feel like I'm coming from a base, and I think our job is to help people get to a certain point, then they go decide what the right thing is.
We hit on this a little bit, but technology, I know you mentioned digitization was something that was big, and we both know that the world is changing very quickly. AI, robotics, climate science, space exploration, misinformation, digital access, all of it, right? How's the Smithsonian thinking about leveraging any of those new technologies in a direct application of how you disseminate that knowledge and information, and or as a user yourselves?
Yeah, so we had an incident happen a couple weeks ago that I think really it was about a month ago, I guess. Somebody had put a video on TikTok, and it was of this really weird fish that looks like a
Hmm.
monster, and it lives at the bottom of the ocean.
Hmm.
And there was a picture of a baby, like, coming out of the front of the fish, and they're like, "Oh, this fish, it's this" I can't remember the name of it, but the mother reaches down and bites the baby's head off, and that's how it, like, reproduces.
Oh my.
And this went viral on TikTok, and the reason we found out about it is we noticed a huge increase in visits to a specific site about this fish
Hmm.
on our website, and we're like, "What the heck is going on?" It turned out the whole thing was AI generated.
Oh
The fish doesn't
wow.
do that. It was 100% false, 100%
Wow.
false. But what we loved and what really made us think is people came to the Smithsonian to find out the truth.
Ooh.
So we're starting to think of ourselves as the house of real.
Ooh. Ooh,
We're
I love that.
We hold. Do you wanna understand the history of slavery in the United States? Come to the African American History and Culture
Amen.
Museum. You wanna hear, how pandas what's going on with pandas and why it's important to save them? Come to the National Zoo. You wanna understand, did we go to the moon? Yes, we did. Did we land on the moon? How do we know? What did we learn there? Come to the National Air and Space Museum. The
Mm.
Smithsonian is the house of real.
Mm.
And so how do
The
we think
house of real. I have
how
to.
how do we think about how to get that information out? How, in our case, to make sure, again, everything's digitized so that people can access it, and there is a standard. We're the standard of real.
Hmm.
And so how do we make sure that that's used, that it's understood? I mean, we are using AI a lot in our research. We're using technology a lot. We're miniaturizing little sensors to follow animals, whether it's migrating giraffes in Kenya or bats in Panama. We put little tiny bat backpacks on bats and follow them
That's
around.
incredible. First
That's
of
what
all, to catch the bat, that's the
Yeah.
first thing.
Yeah, but bats are actually important pollinators. So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons we're doing it is to try to understand that bat human interaction, what's happening to the bats, how is their pollination, how is that affecting behavior? Because again, food's important. We need food, so we need to understand these things. So we're using technology and advancing sensors in order to understand the natural world. But we're also then using AI to query really big data sets. Our
Hmm.
astrophysical observatory up at Harvard, we operate a telescope for NASA. We accumulate these gigantic data sets about the universe.
Hmm.
And so we've created AI models that help us dive deep, deep, deep into that data. And we've like I can't even we've found like 20 times the number of supernovas than people have previously found being able to apply AI to these huge data sets. We're using AI to identify animals in camera trap images because we're collecting thousands and thousands of camera trap images to better understand where species are and where they're not. So AI is an amazing tool that you can use,
Yeah.
but it's also a source of incredible misinformation,
Be
and trying to
responsible.
figure out how do you responsibly use a tool like
Mhm.
that? And then how do you protect yourself against the misinformation that follows?
Wow. Well, okay, so I could keep talking to you, as you know, but I am going to have to bend the curve. And I want to go ahead and go back to the ladies that are listening to us that have an insatiable curiosity, that have a passion around an industry or an area of business that they're leading, and kind of double click on some of the lessons and wisdom that you've shared. So you've led in science, you've led in government, museums, research, and public education as we kind of wrap all of that together. What do you want women listening to understand about building a career of consequence?
Sort of two things I would say. And one is I I do think that if you have the privilege doing what you're passionate about, doing what you care about, doing what you think is important, and that doesn't mean, no judgment zone. What someone thinks is important, as long as
Yes.
it's important to you. Because I think to really put your whole heart and self, which I do think you need to do to be really successful, you really need to put your heart and self into what you do. So I think you have to really have a goal, a mission, a vision of the future that you want to see. And the other thing I have done, and this has been the random walk of my career, is I took opportunities when they came in front of me
Hmm.
that weren't on a straight line, but someone would say to me, "I'd like you to come do this." And I would look at the this and say, "Well, that wasn't the path I thought I would be on.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm totally qualified to do that. I'm going to walk into there and really not know what I'm doing. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to be." And they're asking me to take a leadership role, but man, I don't know. I don't understand this thing that I'm taking on. And I just tended to do that because I tended to follow people rather than
Hmm.
things. Because if there was a boss I really liked, and I've had some amazing, amazing bosses. And in doing so, I gained skills that
Hmm.
really broaden my capabilities. And so now a lot of the times I tell people, if you're offered a job and you feel I got that, that's me. I'm totally good with that. I would argue you're not building yourself, you're not
Ooh,
building your career,
it's right on.
so you shouldn't feel comfortable. And it's hard,
Yeah.
right? It's hard to put yourself in a situation where you
Yeah.
walk in that first day and you feel like such an imposter, and you feel
Yes.
like, "I don't got this. I
I
don't got."
don't got it.
But by the end of that, you're gonna have it, and you're gonna have
Wow.
skills that you didn't have before, and that's the only way to grow. I mean, it's
Hmm.
it's hard to grow without a little bit of uncomfort. I would say a lot of discomfort.
Honestly, I kind of feel like the biggest assessment is always, does the shoe fit? If it does, it's not your shoe. If the shoe feels a little big, then it probably is exactly where you need to be, right? You need
Yeah,
growing room. And then once it fits again, you've outgrown it. So
yeah.
now start lifting your head up and looking around because it's calling you. Just be ready and bold enough to receive it. All right, now I have to kind of go out macro and ask something big for everybody. When future generations look back at this chapter of the Smithsonian, what do you hope they will say the institution had the courage to do?
That's a really great question. I think to me, it would really about how do you make museums relevant for the next 180 years? When you think about it, I mean, museums have been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a museum is a very old concept, right? You get a bunch of rocks and you put them in cases and people come and look at them and are like,
Yes.
wow. So we're dealing with something, like a university, right? A university is a really old concept, right? How do you make that concept relevant today? How do you make that concept relevant and important into the future? And a
Hmm.
big part of it to me is this issue of if we don't get our our collections digitized and online and available, we're not reinventing the museum for the future.
Wow.
Because the museum for the future is one you should be able to pull up on your phone when you need it. It
Wow.
should still be a place. Again, being that house of real, I can't tell you. I used to when I was head of the Air and Space Museum, I used to love to be out at the Ahazi Center, which is out at Dulles Airport, where we have a space shuttle.
Yeah.
And I used to love to go down there. My office was upstairs. I'd come down during the day and I would just walk around the space shuttle, and you'd watch children coming up to that and the awe on their faces, the
Hmm.
inspiration on their faces. There is something to the real. When you have the ruby slippers in front of you, when you
Yeah.
have, Neil Armstrong's spacesuit in front of you, the Wright Flyer, those are real. And that is awe-inspiring, right? And so there's always going to be a place for that house of real, but how do we adapt into the future? And that's through genomics, it's through digitization, it's through making sure these stories aren't just for the 20 million or so people that we get coming to our through our doors every year. It's available to, a kid in Iowa that may never make it to Washington, D.C. It's for a
That's
kid
right.
in Brazil who never makes it to Washington, D.C. So to me, it's leaning into technology to make sure everybody has access to our house of real.
Wow. Ellen, this is incredible. I mean, like I said, I told y'all, this is so much more than the museum field trip that you thought you had. The impact of what you're leading right now is about humanity. If I were to take every single thing that you said and boil it down to just the one word that I'm left with, that I was left with after I met you the first time, it's the humanity that you're responsible for, the preservation, and the dissemination, all of which you've hit on. You have been so generous with your wisdom and your time, and I'm truly grateful. I know that the village around the world has been blessed. If you're ever in the U.S., you've got to make a stop there. Be like Mr. Smithson, who cared so much that he sent money ahead even before he hit the soil. Did he ever hit the soil?
No, never visited.
Oh, wow. That's even more impactful. So, those outside of the US, you got some shoes to fill. Ellen, it's great to see you. I look forward to talking to you soon and being in another room where it happens.
Thank you.
All
So great
right.
to talk to you today.
You too. Bye.